Hey everyone, good morning and good afternoon everyone based on your location. Thanks for joining Paul and I today for the 243 webinar on refresher training, and then we're going to talk about RWP training as well. Before we get started, I see a lot of familiar names on the call. A couple of folks' names I don't recognize. Just real quick, who we are as a company. Spark TS. Many of you know us back in the days when we were known as Spark Training Solutions, but Spark TS, we have RailTasker and PeopleTasker, which is a DOT compliant software, everything from 243 to drug and alcohol testing as a software, as well as operations testing, safety alerts, lots of things like that on our platform to help both railroads and contractors manage FRA's requirements. We also are a third-party administrator, which means we do the drug and alcohol testing and things like MVR checks to help with compliance with DOT regulations. And as many, we have a library of online courses, including FRA-approved courses, and we do quite a bit of 243 support for our customers, including with the plan and refresher training guidance and things of that nature. Again, thanks for joining us. We have another webinar coming up later this month. We are now doing a quarterly check-in on RailTaskers. We'll have Maggie, the RailTasker product owner, in the webinar with me, and we'll look at what was released in the last quarter, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we have planned through the end of this year and next quarter. Actually, some very big releases that just went live last month. Some of you may have noticed that, and we've got quite a bit planned headed through the end of the year with actually a new module or a large part of a module going live as well. If you're using RailTasker, that's a great way to stay up to date on what's happening. I'll also just say we are adding release notes onto our website, and we'll do email campaigns when we do large feature releases as well. But check our website. These quarterly webinars, I think, will be helpful. And then real quick, a little bit about us. Paul Rogalski joins us. He's our Vice President of Operations here at Spark TS. He has been with us, I don't know, Paul, not a year, but we're at like 90 days, 6 months, somewhere in that range, I know. And he comes from a Class 1 railroad where he was their main RailTasker administrator. He also was responsible for Part 243, and he has an instructional design background. So triple threat with Paul. And many of you may know me. I'm Katie Inoue, the CEO and founder of Spark. Also come with a regulatory affairs background and things of that nature. So. Okay. What we're talking about today on the agenda, we're going to really focus high level on 243 refresher training. We did a similar webinar with Corey Johnson from FRA about a year ago, but we still are getting some questions on the requirements. So Paul's going to walk you through all of that. For those of you that may have not noticed, the handout, this PowerPoint is a PDF handout available in the webinar in your tools there. Paul also chatted in a link that goes directly to the 243 compliance guide in case you find that helpful. We will refer to it and take out some pieces of information. It can be helpful. It can also create some more questions sometimes. So along the way, if you guys have questions, please chat them in. If you can't tell, I'm in a hotel today traveling. We may catch some of the questions up at the very end for sure. But I'll try to keep an eye out throughout the presentation in case there's questions. And then finally, please stick with us to the end. I've been working on a project with FRA over, it feels 5 years. All of us know roadway worker protection is a little more challenging than some of the other topics. I'm going to just talk through what I've been working on with FRA. I joined forces with the ASLRRA. There was collaboration between Spark TS and the ASLRRA to come up with some agreements with FRA to make roadway worker protection a lot easier. Please stick through to the end. I'm excited to share that information with all of you. But certainly first, we'll talk through refresher training. With that, Paul, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Katie. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. like Katie said, we'll go over a high-level overview of the refresher training. Hopefully it's old news for most of you, but again, if you have questions as we go along, please let me know, or Katie, just type them into the chat, and we will pause for questions as we go along. The first thing with refresher training is the dates. I don't think we have any class 1s on here, but if we do, as it says in here, this is straight out of the compliance guide that Katie mentioned earlier. The first 3-year cycle of refresher training for class 1s has to be done by this December 31st. For everyone else, contractors, short lines, everybody else, you have to complete your first 3-year cycle by December 31st of 2025. And this really applies to regulations that didn't have refresher training requirements that came into 243 as requiring refresher training. There are some, as it says there, 243 does not supersede other refresher requirement trainings, ones that have shorter timelines, 1-year, 2-year training requirements. You still have to go by those. It doesn't get superseded by 243. So you can't wait the 3 years to do those 1-year refresher trainings. All right. So as part of your 243 submission, you do have to submit your refresher training to the FRA as part of your 243 submittal. Has the same requirements as the initial training, as it says there. If you have adopted a program or already submitted, the submission should be complete, because if it's been approved for both initial and refresher training, you should be good to go there. And again, referring to the compliance manual, there on pages 8 through 11, there are a list of requirements that do not require a submission. That the PCC right here is copied right out of the compliance manual. And as it says there, it's highlighted, it applies to both initial and refresher training. What we see, if you've worked with us on your 243 submissions, you probably haven't over submitted. But Katie likes to say all the time, a lot of places or a lot of companies, contractors over submit to the FRA, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does open you up for more scrutiny sometimes. If you go through this compliance guide and parts or pages 8 through 11 list all the parts that you do not have to submit. You do have to have training for them per 243, but you don't have to submit them for approval to the FRA. So just
I'll just add, yeah, I just want to add, Paul, you need to have training for them to the 243 standard.
Yeah.
It's just the only thing that you don't have to do is submission. And if you're a railroad, I see just a couple contractors on the call today. For railroads, I don't see any reason why to submit anything. If you don't need to submit it, I don't see any value to submitting it anyways, just because then you have the flexibility to change it. If you did submit something, you're like, I wish I didn't submit our track inspector program, for example, you certainly can go into the webinar and make that, or the FRA portal and make that course inactive and pull it back. And then for the contractors on the call, I'll just say, sometimes many of you will submit because your customers want an approval letter. I wrote a blog, it's on our website specifically if do contractors need an FRA approval letter. That's what the blog is called. We use it a lot in helping inform both shortline railroads and contractors to help them walk through that. But sometimes it's just easier to submit, get the approval letter than to try to have those conversations.
As Katie mentioned, if you do submit to the FRA and you change a training program, then you will have to submit an informational filing with those changes. If you don't submit, you can update those programs as needed as things come up. Just a little step there that you have to do that informational filing if it's submitted to the FRA, and then they have to approve that informational filing.
And the reason we have it here is, I think in the beginning, and maybe there's less confusion now, but we all were so focused on initial training, right? When 243 became live, I worked with all of the class 1s in some capacity and worked a significant amount of the rest of the industry on it. Even me was like, I'm not even thinking about refresher training at that point. All of the 243 conversations were initial submissions and so forth. Refresher training is here now. And we just want to make sure to emphasize, if you had to submit it for your initial training, you absolutely have to submit what you're doing for refresher training. Don't forget refresher training is part of those submission requirements. And some class 1s had that thought that they weren't going to submit refresher, and it's just not the case. So, all right.
All right, again, going back to the compliance manual, this is on page 23 of the compliance manual. What this is showing here, what they put in here for you is these are a list of CFR parts that already required refresher training prior to 243 coming into effect. And when you look at the notes at the bottom, the frequency or other section down there, you'll see a few with some 1s, 2s, 3s next to them. In the compliance guide, it explains what those are. For example, if it has a 3 next to it, those parts require not only refresher training, but they require a hands-on component as well. So you have to have a classroom component and a hands-on component as part of the refresher training. And then the 1 and 3 are just the years, calendar years, how often you have to do the refresher training. These are not superseded by 243. These were already existing that required refresher training.
Paul, for 232, we've known that's every 3 years, and then it already had that hands-on component.
Exactly, classroom and hands-on.
But the hands-on component's just for initial training and not necessarily for refresher training.
Yeah, 232. Yeah, correct. Sorry, yeah, I may have said that. Yeah. I mean,
no, you probably didn't. I just want to emphasize it because since we're zeroed in on refresher training, you don't need OJT or hands-on training for refresher training. However, with 232 is unique because it does specifically call out classroom training. A lot of you use our online courses. 232 in particular, FRA says needs to be classroom training.
In addition to that, it's on page 23 in the compliance manual. These regulations we've listed here now require refresher training under the Part 243 refresher training requirements. Into their 215, 219, 221. These are all new regulations, or not new regulations, but new refresher training requirements under 243. 236, it had a refresher training requirement already for PTC, but now under 243, it requires refresher training as well for other components in there.
And certainly with the signal certifications looming over us, right, that's going to shift a little bit, Part 234 and 236. And we already did do one webinar on those new regulations, and we plan on doing additional ones. There's a couple things in flux with that. We just want to see a little bit more guidance and clarity. And as soon as we have that, we'll host those additional webinars to help with those too. I think this was a list that I maybe came up with. I don't know if it's in the compliance manual, just calling out what needs refresher training that didn't before.
It's not laid out quite like that. If you dig through the compliance manual, you'll find this, but this is just a concise list of what requires refresher training that didn't prior to 243. Yep.
Super helpful. I just want to say too, this is at the part levels. The guidance here is it did, but then now we're saying it didn't because Part 236 includes wayside signals, train control systems, and PTC. But it gets a little tricky when you're looking at things at the whole part level. And for those of you that have created a 243 plan with either me or with Paul, you know that's not how we do stuff here because it's just too simplistic. The other thing is when you look at part pages 8 through 11, you'll see down here, like the compliance manual at this part is going to go to the very paragraph level of what you do not have to submit. Just be careful. A word of caution when you say things at the whole part level, even like part 218, there's some things that need submission and some don't. Be careful when you're questioning at that part level. And then we'll go, back here, Paul, unless you want me to go back a slide.
No, that's fine. I guess we could just touch on it that what they want for refresher training. It can be initial training repeated, but the idea behind the refresher training is that you look at incidents, accidents, FRA reports, things like that, and you tailor your refresher training to issues, to new technology, to new equipment that you might have. That's really what the FRA would like to see for refresher training. That's again out of the compliance manual from page 22.
Yes, and I'll just add here because we've got a lot of customers using our online courses. Some of you might be association members with the association courses. If you're taking, I'm just trying to think, like the drug and alcohol testing, like supervisor signs and symptoms and post-accident toxicological, the PAT testing for Part 219. Certainly you're going to just take that whole online course again. And a lot of you using our online courses, likely the initial refresher will be the same. But when it comes to your operating rules training, I think this is where, despite your size, short lines included, you can tailor your refresher training on your rules based on things that you feel like should be emphasized based on the data that's listed here. Again, FRA says they'll accept the initial training, but oftentimes you'll shorten your rules training. They expect that kind of on all the topics, maybe even track inspection and things like that, but it's less likely. I think more likely it's going to be rules training where you're going to do that. Would you agree, Paul?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, unless you get some new piece of technology in there that affects another area, new piece of equipment, then you can use that refresher training time to reemphasize that new equipment. But yeah, it's generally going to be rules where you, like Katie said, you can shorten the training time, highlighting concerns or issues that may have happened throughout the year. Okay, recently we have worked, well, Katie had started working with the FRA. I finished up the work when I came on to create these field refresher training checklists. The FRA recently approved several of them for us. I broke them out here. The first slide shows engineering, bridge, and signal checklists. So these have been approved by the FRA for refresher training. And I listed the parts there that each one covers as far as the refresher training. You'll see a highlight there on the RWIC one because they wanted us to call out the, in addition to this refresher training, you also have to make sure you're doing the annual 214 subpart C recurrent training. You can't just do this checklist every 3 years to meet your refresher training requirement. We have several there. You see we got crane operator, roadway maintenance machine operator, RWIC, track inspector, bridge worker safety, grade crossing safety, and signal maintenance personnel field refresher training for this area. The next slide lists some of the mechanical ones we got approved by the FRA. Carman, electrician, machinist, mechanical basic, and then we also have the mechanical locomotive. And the reason there's a mechanical locomotive and then a machinist as well is that the mechanical locomotive covers employees that do both machinist and electrician work. If you have separate machinists, separate electricians, we also have separate refresher checklists for that training. And you can see there for the Carman and for the machinist, we mentioned it earlier, but you also have to have a Part 232 classroom training. In addition, even if you do this refresher training checklist, you do also have to do classroom training to cover the Part 232 refresher training.
If I can just give a little background to this, Paul, if that's okay. I'm not sure where you're headed.
Yeah, like I said, yeah, I was just going to show the list.
Yeah, do this, talk through this. That might be helpful first, and then I'll.
This is what they look like. They look similar to our OJT checklist, but since it's refresher training, you also see that it has prerequisites in there. It has to have a duration, objectives, and then we listed out a training overview that just explains how these are supposed to be used. So it's a combination of demonstration, explanation, asking questions to people in the field, but then you do just sign them off just like you do an OJT checklist. As each person completes each task, you watch them do the task. It's a combination of in the field training and hands-on work to get this refresher training completed. You can do it as like a question and answer session as well, walking through some of these tasks.
Yeah, this is something it's funny because this webinar summarizes two things I've been working on since probably 2012 with FRA. And one is the roadway worker stuff we'll talk about. The other is since the very first time I met Rob Castiglione, I was working at a class 1. I've been pushing for this. The idea is that from a class 1, I had different motivations, but for the short lines and contractors on the call today, the idea of this is you don't have to put everybody into a big PowerPoint, write a written exam for, let's say you have 2 track inspectors. You could go through and use Railtasker and go through this process of field refresher training. It is not on-the-job training. On-the-job training is learning the job when you're doing the job for initial qualification. Instead, this is field training out in the field that's why we have the training overview and learning objectives and a duration. Going through those items like this, like a coaching and demonstration. And the checklist is documenting that's happening and is also the hands-on assessment. Again, not on the job training. I just think it'd be so much easier for you all based on size and certain positions to have it as an option. This is not in addition to refresher training that would be classroom or online training. This is instead of. If you have Part 213 is the perfect example, track inspection. It's not an online course. We have almost everything, right? Is one of the few we do not have as an online course available to you. You don't have to send somebody to an expensive course, classroom course. You don't have to purchase anything. If you're our customer, you could use these checklists, use Railtasker to document it, and you just need that coach, somebody that could be the designated instructor to facilitate that. It is something that I've built for the class one since I left that previous employer, that they had been doing for things like crane training and other topics that just lend themselves well, for whatever reason, to field refresher training. But Paul really did spearhead getting all of this content approved and vetted with FRA, and now is available to you all. Is there anything else, Paul, we should add?
No, that was good. Yeah. And you'll see the prerequisites, like Katie said, this is not for initial certification. You have to be, in this case, one of the prerequisites that you're already qualified as a carman. You do have to go through that 243 process with the OJT and the training to become a qualified carman. But like Katie said, then for refresher training, these can be used instead of. And we do put in here the ones that require the classroom training as one of the prerequisites as well.
We'll put the prerequisites up here, so it's a good example. If you need something, there is a nuance with part 214, subpart C, it sounds, and then 232. Those will be in the prerequisites, you'll know. And just like we talked about with the submissions, and for those of you that have done your plans with Paul or I, you should strike out, if you have to submit this and you're going to submit this as refresher training, I would do the same thing you did with your OJT checklist. They should match exactly. If you made changes to your OJT checklists, for example, we're just looking at blue flag protection. If you only are other than main track, a lot of the short lines are just other than main, that's fine. We probably did some strikeouts for your FRA submission and did that. I would recommend you do the exact same process and then submit this with changes and upload that document, just like we did for your initial submission. Certainly the Carmen checklist, that's example here, is one that would require a submission, and you should have that OJT submission as a reference point for that.
I think that was it. Yeah, that was it for.
That's it. If you have questions, please chat them in. I'm not seeing anything right now. We have a pretty good group on the calls. Hopefully that just means things are straightforward enough. Hopefully this is good news. These checklists are extra things. I'm excited to share with you the roadway worker protection stuff. Paul, thanks for all your work on the refresher training and getting those checklists done. What we know about part 214, right? Roadway worker protection training, we call that, it's all encompassing. In part 214, we have different job classifications that part 214 has, and each of those job classifications has specific callouts on what's required. If you're an RWIC, if you're a lone worker, and so forth. I'm just calling roadway worker protection is an all-encompassing term here because that's how we use it in the industry, not as a regulatory term. But we know that training has to be specific to a railroad's on-track safety program and operating rules. This is created for the contractors on the call, where you're going to take 5 roadway worker protection courses for 5 different railroads. I see we have some holding companies on the call, several holding companies on the call. If you have different rules or different things happening at different properties, you have to have that training from across property to property. It is my very first client. I started the company 2017, first started working with a large contractor that worked coast to coast, and then 3 months later with the class ones. That contractor, they did rail grinding, or they still do, but their new hires were doing 6 to 7 RWP courses as part of new hire training over the course of 4 days, A to Z. It was just outrageous. And the cost and the time spent, and I don't think there's any safety value. If you can tell, this is something that I'm very excited we finally got FRA to agree to. I did, in partnership with the ASLRRA, I went to them. I had already been talking to FRA. I got a level of agreement. I worked with them in partnership to really finalize the details of what this looks like. Either Spark TS or for ASLRRA members have a template they can use that's going to be supplemental annual training that is be provided as a handout for just some of the job categories under Part 214. For roadway workers, for roadway maintenance machine operators, watchmen, lookouts, and flagmen. The people missing are RWICs and lone worker. this supplemental handout you can provide to them, but they still need host railroad specific classroom training and a written exam, hopefully for the obvious reasons to you all. Now, in this template that was created, we vetted it with the FRA's 243 team. The 243 team coordinated vetting it throughout FRAs. They worked with the 214 team at FRA. And it covers all the things that they expect to have in this supplemental handout. If you are a contractor, for instance, and some of you are on the call, you could take the Spark TS online roadway worker protection course. And then you could have a handout with our template. You would have to complete it for each of your customers, each of the host railroads. And then each year, make sure employees take the online core course, which is the prerequisite, and then receive the handout for each of the customers that they do. And in the handout, there's some additional guidance, and if you're going to the regional meetings, the short line meetings this month and next, we're going to do a presentation just on this. But strongly recommend you have employees sign it and date it, and then have a copy, give them a copy, but maybe give 2 copies for your records. And contractors, roles and responsibility, you should keep those records, not the railroad, you're the employer. But this needs to be done once a year, but it will save you from taking the same RWP course 5 to 6 times with just different red zone footage, and all the little silly things that are nuanced between property is in this handout. I could talk about this for a lot longer, and JR Gellner and I will be presenting in more detail at the regional meetings on this, but we're going to start reaching out to our contractor customers in particular to get the word out on this, because this is huge. And again, I'll just also say, we have a Spanish version of RWP for you all to use too on our online library, and you could easily translate this into Spanish if needed. I do see some questions. Anything you want to add before I go to the question? Anything on the RWP question you think, for RWP supplemental training, that I should add?
No, I don't think so.
All right, then let's go to the questions. The first refresher training is due 12/31/2025. When is the next cycle due? We go back to those timelines. We'll just go back we can look at them while we talk about them. Correct. It's interesting. The first cycle is the end of 2025. So you've got all of next year to complete your refresher training for Part 243 for all the contractors and short lines, and the short lines that we have should qualify for that. It's a calendar year. 243 is oddball to me because like our certifications are on a 36-month cycle, and 243 happens to be a calendar cycle. I would recommend, so the cycle's every 3 calendar years by regulation. And I know the person that asked this question, and sometimes we don't need to overthink this. What I would do is don't overthink this. I would err towards every 36 months. If you're using the Rail Tasker certification and qualification module, you have the option to run things by calendar years or by months. But for simplicity, I would just consider maybe 36 months. Hopefully that answers the question. Paul, anything you would add on those cycles?
No, I was going to say, yeah, it would be 3 calendar years from when you complete it. So if you complete it in 2025, it would be 2028 for the ones that require 3-year training. But like Katie said, if you stick with the 36 months, then you're safe.
I don't know why the regulation, they wrote 243 that way, because if you think about on-track safety or RWP training, it's 1 calendar year. You can do RWP anytime in 2024, and then you have to do it again anytime in 2025. It gives you some flexibility, but it gets really awkward and weird when you're looking at 3-year calendar year cycles. Like, it doesn't quite work. And I would just recommend going by the 36 months. It's just, yeah. Okay, other question. Is there a difference between recurring and refresher training with 213 and 214? Paul, what do you say? And I'll just say track safety standards, and then we've got part 214 where our on-track safety programs and bridge worker safety is.
Yeah, recurring and refresher training are or can be the same.
It's fundamentally the same, right?
Yeah.
In the webinar we did a year ago, the one I hosted and Corey Johnson joined, we went in a little bit in detail into part 214 has this demonstrated proficiency component of it that just makes it even a little bit more confusing. I think an ops test can be part of that for the part 214, but just for simplicity, some say refresher, some say recurrent. It's the same. Yeah, did I use the right terms? Oh, now I'm in my answering, we've probably got more questions. It's just fine. Somebody has a specific question about using the Railtasker LMS. They have their own SCORM files, which you guys all know. Railtasker LMS, you have our courses, you can add your own courses. And however, the renewal is not showing up. Yeah, I can see that. Yes, that can definitely be fixed. I know why that would be the case. If you're uploading and creating your own courses, there's a lot of course settings. If you're having us do it, my team, support team, Minnie, Diane, Mackenzie, and we have Andrea on the support team, amazing. They're going to do exactly what you ask them to because they're not regulatory people like me. If you say upload the SCORM for me, please, this is the name, they'll do just that. Now, when there is a refresher requirement, we need to attach that to the course. If you have your own refresher courses, and thank you so much for this question. I wish I would have thought of just adding it to the webinar. If you have your own training in our LMS, in the Railtasker LMS, and it's not showing those certificates, we'll email support. My email's up on there, but it's literally just support@sparkts.net, and we'll need to get that fixed for you, and we can catch up people so that everything is the way it should be. The person that asked this question, Paul, we can reach out. I'll have Diane directly just reach out to you to get that fixed. It'll be 2 steps. We'll have to add that renewal period in there. And then we'll also need to get the people uploaded with their completions into that renewal so that they can take that course again. You certainly can reassign the course and manage it yourself, but obviously the benefit of the LMS is having those reports. The LMS also there's lots of reports available, but I recommend 2. One is the completion. If you enroll people, you can see the gaps of what people have been told they need to complete and what they've completed. And then there is a refresher training report, and those reports can be created and saved and emailed to you monthly or whatever frequency that you want. I just lost my little question box. Hopefully I answered that one. I don't see, and now
There's another one.
Yeah, now we're getting LMS questions. Within the LMS, will courses ever automatically renew training and alert employees that the course has been renewed? All right. Automatic. There's some improvements on refresher training in the LMS that have come into effect in the last year. I don't know. Again, Diane's our expert, but I know what you're asking on the LMS side. You can create, and I think the person that asked this question has this set up this way. You can, when somebody, let's say I have to take my Blue Signal training every 3 years, you can have an email notification go to the employee saying your Blue Signal training is coming due in the next 30 days. You can set up the threshold, and in that email there'll be a link that will take them directly to that course space to renew the training. That seems like a favorite email notification out of all the email notifications we can automate in the LMS. But beyond that, I am not sure if there's more automations. I know that we meet with our LMS provider, and the #1 topic we ask them is the improvements on refresher training. I would have to dig in with Diane on that. I had a meeting with them probably 4 to 6 months ago, and I know that you can have them just retake the same exam and have all of that not be reset, that the grade they had initially, and then the grade they had for the refresher is all in the Railtasker LMS, which the person asked us has been with us for quite a long time. There was some times where we did some roundabout ways of managing that we no longer have to do. Thank you all for joining. I'm just going to put, because Paul's email, both of our emails. It is wonderful to have Paul on the team. Both of us know 243 and can answer 243 questions. I would say direct maybe your 243 questions off to Paul. He also, as the VP of Operations, has the support team reporting to him as well as the development team. Feel free to reach out to all of us. We are here to help. Anything you want to add, Paul, before we close it out?
Yeah, somebody put it in the questions too, but I noticed this earlier. My email is wrong on there. My email is just paul@smartps.net. So
okay, that might have been a last minute edit. Paul actually has his own email address.
I do, and I have to go through Katie.
Good thing I went back to that slide. Thank you for that. So thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Oh, one more.